centered the clay a little differently than I would with a bowl. I've centered it taller and narrower. And the base of my cylinder, regardless of whether it's going to be a cylinder that curves quite a bit or a cylinder that comes straight up and down, a mug, a pitcher, whatever it is, the base is going to be about this wide. Now I can do whatever I want with the top, but it's going to be based on a shape that's this wide. So when you center the cylinder, you need to be thinking about that shape. If you want it to have a narrow base, you got to start it narrow. So I'm going to go ahead and drill my hole. Drilling the hole shouldn't be a lot different, although if I'm not going to trim a foot on my cylinder, I can drill my hole a little bit deeper than I would for a bowl. Of course, with a taller piece like this, I may get to the point where at the very bottom of drilling my hole, I need to stretch out the top a little. As I'm bringing my fingertips down, I picked up some clay, so I'm taking that out of there. Got plenty of water in there, and you notice when I get to this point, the top of my hand is kind of stretching the clay. And those of you with bigger hands are going to find that that's more of the case. You're going to be stretching it more. Now, this is the next point at which there's a major difference. And this is going to kind of set the tone for everything else you do with a cylinder. When you're opening out the floor on a bowl, you bring your fingertips out and curve them up a little bit at the end. Right? They stay straight, they stay moving across this way, they come up a bit at the end. With a cylinder, you're trying to keep them completely flat all the way across. So you're trying to create a flat floor instead of a rounded floor. Now the other thing is, depending how much shaping you want to do, you're not going to want to use the whole length of your fingers, or maybe you're not going to be able to because your wall is too thick. So you're going to bring your hand across like this, or perhaps tuck it in like that. It looks like I'm going to tuck it in and work on just the bottom. And you see not a lot appears to be happening on the top of my clay here. Now my piece is relatively large, relatively deep, and so I'm going to open out that bottom, and that's about as far as I can go. You haven't seen much of a change happen out here. Now I'm going to switch, so now my fingers are pulling up that wall. And this is similar to when you pull up the wall on a bowl. One difference is that it's a little bit harder to keep those two hands connected on a tall piece like this. And the other difference is that with a cylinder, you generally want to bring it taller rather than wider. And so instead of watching the outside wall, you tend to watch the inside wall. Now before I get too much deeper, I'm going to get in my rib on the floor to compress my floor and get my floor flattened out. When I pulled open the floor with my fingertips, I tried to keep that floor flat, but it wasn't perfect. It's got a little bit bump there, so I'm going to use this flat piece of the rib, just like I would with a metal rib on the floor of a bowl, to press that floor. This is one of those things that beginners sometimes try to avoid, but it's going to make a difference, and doing it, practicing it from the get-go, from the very start, is going to make you better at it than getting to your very last cylinder and saying, okay, now I'm going to try that because I'm not so scared. You really do need to have the chance to practice it. Alright, so I'm going to watch my inside wall, and I'm going to pull up. Now I'm going to make a narrow piece at the top. So what I'm going to do is work on just the bottom and get this shaping done while I still can. Then after I've thinned out that bottom and gotten any water out of my floor, then I can start to work on this more center section. And part of the reason for working in separate sections is that when it gets too tall for me, when it gets to a certain height, I'm not going to be able to reach the floor anymore. I'm also going to use a rib on my outside, and depending on the shape you want, you might use a metal or a wooden rib, the flat edge or the curved edge. Using a rib not only compresses that wall and makes it a little bit stronger, but it also takes that slip off of the surface. And anytime there's slip on the surface, your clay is going to be absorbing that slip. And as it absorbs that slip, it gets wetter. And as it gets wetter, it gets less strong. So now I've worked through that center section. Now I need to work up into through the middle and into the top. But I'm really trying to bring this wall up towards the middle because I don't want it to get too wide on me. Now some unevenness is pretty typical on this. A little bit of wobble up there at the top. you tend to get that, although you don't always get it quite this early. I'm going to get some water on my hands and do what's called collaring. Collaring needs to be done real slow and gentle, because what you're basically doing is squeezing the clay, and the clay doesn't particularly like it. After every couple collars, you need to come through with a pull to compress that wall. And notice my little unevenness here. It's not gonna go away until I cut it off, although I can work with it for a little while until it gets to get rough. Getting back here on the outside, I'm looking at the outside so I can get an angle so I can see what I'm doing, but I'm really concentrating on using more pressure on my outside hand and trying to keep my outside hand a little higher. I'm also going to use my rib again on this outside edge, down here at the bottom in case it's absorbing any. I can use a rib against my hand to try to shape that wall. And I can even get down here low and bring that rib up, or my finger up against the rib to make it more of a curve. Now this wobble is starting to bother me, so I'm going to cut it off at the top. Use my needle tool, bring it in underneath that unevenness, and just take that off. Now hopefully what I've got below, a little bit lower here, is more even. We'll see.